Okay, hopefully this works for me this time. We'll see. Okay. All right. So want to go through this training, not because there has to be any drastic changes in our window problem conversation. You know, I see a lot of people doing a great job out there with it. I think it's fairly obvious that a lot of people are doing a great job with it because you can see the numbers and you can see the way that customers are reacting. You know, we've had a massive amount of sales considering the amount of people that we have out there. We have some people that are averaging between 11 and 17 demos per week. There's a lot of great successes going on, and I think that a big part of that is because of the adaptations that we've made and the changes that we made over the last year or so. A lot of these changes, I don't think that we realized that we made. I think that what we realized was when we're out there at events and you know, at retail locations and stuff like that, there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of things that you know, we're so used to being able to go up to the houses and reading the problems on the windows, seeing them and whatnot. When you can't do that for a year, you find other ways to be able to construct that, to be able to do that. Okay. So you find other ways to be able to construct that conversation. So I do think getting back into it, we're approaching things in a little bit of a different way. Now, of course, you can't work with everybody all the time, right? You see little snippets of what people are doing and whatnot, but there's been a few things that have worked for me since I've been back out there, and a few different ways that we're sort of training on the problems with windows that we hadn't really thought about before. So before, the way that it always worked was this was a textbook kind of boom, boom, boom. We're reading off a paper. How many windows do you have that are like this? How many doors do you have that are like this? What kind of problems are you having here? How long have you been dealing with this problem? And I think there's a little bit of a different way to look at things. Okay. So yeah, so I think there's a little bit of a different way to look at it. I think that it starts off with the introduction. I think that's the biggest difference that we have now is instead of looking at the window problems conversation as its own separate part, you have to look at the conversation as a whole, starting with the introduction and going into the window problems and so on and so forth. Okay, into the close and the value of the visit and whatnot. Okay, that's the biggest difference. That's the biggest difference I see is that we're not looking at this as one segment and one part anymore. We're looking at this from the introduction through. Okay. So what I mean by that is I don't mean like, hey, good afternoon, my name is Paul Duffy. I'll show you what I mean. So I start off, knock, knock, knock. Good afternoon, my name is Paul Duffy. I hope you're Mr. Jones. Hi, Mr. Jones. I'm with Renewal by Andersen Windows. We just did some work for Mrs. Smith. This is what we used to say for Mrs. Smith on 123 Main Street. I noticed you're going to be replacing your windows soon, and I may be able to help. That's the way that we've always learned and taught to do it. Okay. And it's not wrong. It's not a wrong way to do it. I think that if you're learning the script and system, then that's the way that you do it. Right. But I think that the first important thing there, and we do it on that too, and this is something that, you know, myself and the team leaders have to get better at, is we have to be utilizing jobs that we've done at every single house. And as soon as you set an appointment, you should be using appointments that you set too. Okay. Because it's beneficial for the customer. It makes more sense to them to go out and get it done or take a look or whatever, given that fact. Okay. Given the fact that we set up an appointment and that we're doing a job in the neighborhood, it makes sense. Again, if you make it easy for them to understand that this is worth it doing, then it's easy to understand. Makes sense though. Okay. So the way that I would do it now, okay, and I'll point out the differences. I knock on the door. Good afternoon. My name is Paul Duffy. I hope you're Mr. Jones. Okay. Hi, Mr. Jones. I'm with Renewal by Andersen. And what I'm being a little bit more distinct. We just did some work for Mrs. Smith. Actually, you might be familiar with the street, and I'll point out to the street. I'm actually gaining that customer's attention to the street, that in the area of it anyways. You might be familiar with Fairgrounds Drive, 122 Fairgrounds Drive. And I noticed that you had the same kind of windows as Mrs. Smith, and it was something that I might be able to help with. Okay. Something like that. Okay. You're doing a couple different things there. First of all, you're getting them more included. You're pointing. Okay. You're gaining the customer's attention and you're pointing out. Okay. Second, with that attention, you're using an actual customer, an actual address that can resonate with them. It makes sense. Hey, we just saw those windows get replaced. You have the same windows as well. So it makes it a lot easier for the customer to take. Okay. Now that will change and adapt based on what you see. And I think that's the other thing that we realize now versus before. Before, the way that it always worked was we did the same thing all the time. It was not, we go right into, I may be able to help. I may be able to help. Okay. Instead of the I may be able to help now, which you can perfectly use, absolutely great, fantastic. But instead of just I may be able to help, there's other more beneficial ways to do it. So for example, if you know that they have the original windows, or they have the same windows as everybody else in the neighborhood, then it's as simple as I noticed that you had the original windows just like your neighbors or just like Mrs. Jones, and it's something I might be able to help with. Okay. Or dive right into the problems. Here's the way I like to do it. For example, I noticed that you had the same windows as Mrs. Jones. Okay. Now, how long have you lived in the home? Okay. I love asking that question. How long have you lived in the home? So to put that together again, okay, I knock on the door. Good afternoon. My name is Paul Duffy. I hope you're Mr. Jones. Hi, Mr. Jones. I'm with Renewal by Andersen. We just did some work. Actually, you might be familiar right down over here on Fairgrounds Road for Mrs. Smith over on 123 Fairgrounds Road. And it looked like you had the original windows just like Mrs. Jones did, or Mrs. Smith did rather. Now, how long have you lived in the home? Okay. So that would be a good way to enter into that conversation. All right. Now you might get an objection or something like that. Usually the person's going to answer. That's my key feature first question for two reasons. Number one, it gives me some different information. If the person's been there for 30 years, they're more closely tied to the home. They're more in tune with that. They've gotten the windows done once or twice. They've been through the process. They understand the process. Maybe they did it themselves. Maybe I don't want to trash the installation because maybe they did themselves, something like that. Okay, but it gets me some information. They're going to have felt the drafts in their home over and over again. Let's say, for example, it's a younger person just moved in pretty recently. Oh, yeah, I moved in 6 months ago. It tells me that I'm going to have a little bit more control over that conversation. That person does not know the windows as well. They're more apt to make changes with the home because they just moved in. Usually when people move into houses, even if it's move-in ready, it comes with a set of plans. It comes with a set of plans that they want to execute when it comes to the windows, right? It comes with a set of plans that they want to execute when it comes to the windows. Make sense? Now, of course, that doesn't mean that every person's that way, but a lot of times what I recognize about homeowners that have not been there for a long time is that there's a higher level of they give you a lot more leeway. They ask more questions. They don't if I say to a newer homeowner, you might have felt drafts this winter or something like that, they're usually going to answer yes to more questions. And part of that, I think, is when you reach people that are newer to the home, a lot of times they're younger couples and stuff like that. They're more apt, they don't like the vinyl windows. They know the vinyl windows aren't great. And so they're more apt to take that well. Whereas the people that have been there for a long time, they have vinyl windows. They were pitched those vinyl windows back in the 90s or the early 2000s. They were pitched those vinyl windows as replacements to the wooden windows. Okay. So that's a big difference there, a big core difference there. Okay. Now digging deeper into the conversation. So first, where we're at right now, knock on the door. Good afternoon. My name is Paul Duffy. I hope you're Mr. Jones. Hi, Mr. Jones. I'm with Renewal by Andersen Windows. We just did some work actually right over on 123 Fairgrounds Road, right over here for Mrs. Smith. And I noticed that you had the same windows as Mrs. Smith. So how long have you lived in the home? 6 months. Oh, wow. So you're new to the home. That's great. That's great. Well, fantastic buy too. It's a beautiful place here. Where'd you move from? Actually, like just a couple miles away. We bought this house and whatnot. And I know a lot of times they'll add in like I know that the windows aren't great, or sometimes they say I know that they replaced them not that long ago, something like that, right? No matter what, I'm going to dive into the conversation the same way. Absolutely, yeah, and it's great. It looks like you made a great purchase. Now I just wanted to point out a couple things that I noticed with your windows, and I'm going to dive into the problems. Okay, if they've been there for 30 years and approach it the same way, oh yeah, we've been in the house for 30 years. Wow, 30 years. You must have seen this neighborhood grow then. Awesome. Are you the original owners of the home? Okay. And how many times have you gotten the windows replaced before? Right. Asking questions like that, it gets you further into the conversation. Okay. Yeah, no, we got them replaced a few years back, vinyl windows and whatnot. Okay. Now I'm going to dive into the windows conversation. Okay. Now for me, listen, a lot of people that I see out there, they're using a standard of like what the part of the conversation that they're using is condensation in the glass. Okay. That's I think that the reason why I don't think that that's a great problem to pick out is condensation in the glass is because you're not going to see it in every neighborhood. You're not going to see it in the majority of neighborhoods. You might see it in 10% of neighborhoods. Now, when you see it, it's a great thing to pick out. So if you see it in a neighborhood, then it's an awesome idea to continue to talk about the condensation in the glass, to continue to talk about that. It's an awesome idea. Okay. When it comes to most of the houses, if you're asking about condensation and you don't see it, you're just going to get a no, a habitual no. Okay. That's the problem there. That's the difference. Okay. That's why it's so important for you to make sure that if you see it in the neighborhood, you point out. If you don't see the neighborhood, ask it, fine. Don't make it the core of your pitch. Okay. Now, drafts are an easy thing to bring up. I think it's a fine thing to bring up. I think people will admit that. I think it's all about how you ask the question, though. That's the other thing I notice about my pitch now, and a lot of people too. They're asking the question in a different way. Instead of saying, hey, how many windows are drafty? They're saying, look, maybe not a gust of wind here, but I'm sure that some of these windows are losing a little bit more energy efficiency. It's hard to answer no to that question. Now, some people will. Some people say, no, I think they're fine or whatever, but a bigger portion of people will say yes to that. Now, of course, if you notice problems like weep holes, that's still what we're not pointing out enough. And that's the last thing I want to point out was things like the weep holes and whatnot. One thing that I think that we're missing because of COVID, and we can still do it, and that's what I hope people understand is you want to bring people up to the windows, to the window problems, okay? So when someone has, for example, the weep holes on their windows, okay, point that out to the customer. Bring them up to it. The way I like to bring that up, one of the first things that I bring up to the customers, Mr. Jones, I don't know if you're familiar at all, these two little holes that are on each of your windows. Do you know what that is? And they almost always say no, okay? And my response is that's the drainage system for the window, okay? But most of the time they're very, very ineffective. A lot of times water gets caught in them, sir, and you wouldn't even know it, but the water will go into the frame of the window and will start to rot the window up, okay? So I bring that up in that way to the customer. And it's not something they can say no to. So it's a conversation that I'm having with the customer, that I'm bringing up with the customer, not a conversation that needs to be driven by them. And that's one of the things I like about the problems, okay? The same thing with glass impaction. And that's something that I do see some people bring up, but I see people bringing it up in different ways. I see a lot of people asking the question, have you seen glass impaction? No customer knows what glass impaction is, so it's an impossible question for them to answer. And so stop giving them the impossible question, okay? Instead, say to them, I noticed that there was some warping in the glass of your vinyl windows here. Now, I don't know if you've noticed it before. There's a problem with your windows called glass impaction. That warping causes the glass to push, and that's why your windows look like they have a funhouse effect on them, okay? Point that out. They can't say no to it. Again, you're showing them that problem, right? So there's an extreme benefit to being able to show that customer that problem instead of having them say no to it, okay? So you're designing this conversation again, and you design this conversation. What I like to do is ask about a problem like drafts. I get an objection or a no rather, and then I bring up a problem like the weep holes, something that they can't say no to. Then I ask another problem. Then I bring up another problem that they can't say no to. Okay, so that way, no matter what, by the end of that conversation, I have a good bit of issues, okay, a good bit of problems that I can bring up to them. Okay. So the second thing I want to point out, you don't need to have 1,000 problems to set an appointment, but you do want to have a good baseline of problems, because if you don't, then you're going to get the objections later on. Okay. So take the objections now. Make sure you get a couple problems out. There's way too many notes that come out with like just once Windows updated, stuff like that. That stuff cancels, guys. That stuff cancels. Okay. So it's important to have a good base of problems to bring up to the customer, serious issues. Okay. And we're going to continue this conversation later on tonight. I'm going to put another video up talking about doors specifically. But the last thing I want to bring up is that there's a extreme lack of doors. Either people are going after them or they're not. But when people are going after doors, it's either a lot of times when the customer brings it up, okay, like they might say something about, well, we do entry doors or something like that. Or do you do entry doors? Or it's when we're in the middle of getting Windows tour in that conversation. What we're lacking in, I think, just from the people that I've worked with is bringing up the doors as something to save you from losing. Okay, so you talk about the windows, the customer, objects to windows, it doesn't, or whatever. You talk about the windows, and then you let go of the doors. You should never leave a house without bringing up the doors. The way that I bring that up is if, let's say, the windows are brand new, just brand new, they got them replaced a year ago. Okay. The first question I have is how many windows do you have left to replace? It's great that you did the windows. They look awesome. How many windows do you have left to replace? None. We did them all. Okay. Now, how old are your doors? Or you could say, what kind of doors do you have on your home? Are they all entry doors just like this, or do you have patio doors in the back as well? Now, if you know they have patio doors, just bring it up. And that's another thing, again, when you're talking to a customer, even if they don't set an appointment, if they just replace their back patio door, their entry door, something like that, then ask them why they replaced it, okay? Chances are, in most neighborhoods, every person's going to have the same door. Great. It's an awesome way to be able to have that conversation with the customer, a window problem or a door problem conversation with the customer, okay? So just keep that in mind. All right, we're going to make a part 2 to this. It's going to get more in depth. I'm going to have some role playing. I just want to go through a brief overview of some adaptations that we've had in the problems with Windows conversation.